We will tell you why you should not be selling Joe Mixon in your dynasty leagues. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. And joining me today is not Matt Williamson, but it's Matt Price, my buddy from DLF and the DLF Dynasty Podcast. You can follow Matt at MattPriceFF. Matt, glad to have you on here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited, Ryan. I get to talk to you multiple times this week. I think I was on back when it was still the Blueprint years ago, but this is my first time, I believe, on the Locked On format. So love being here with you.
Yeah, Matt, I don't know if you caught last week's shows, but as you know, because we do work together on the DLF podcast, I was out last week. I was in Disney World. I was still on the Locked On Dynasty podcast, recording from my hotel room. The rest of the fam was hanging out at the pool. I was missing out. And, I was dedicated. Williamson praised me for that. And this week he's on vacation. And you see what's going on here. He couldn't pull the trigger. He also probably won't listen to this, so I'll give him a little bit of grief. But we are going to talk Cincinnati Bengals. We're talking Joe Mixon, and we're continuing our buy, sell, and hold series. I know Kate and Marcus talked about Lamar Jackson. That's one of Matt's favorite players, by the way, one of your favorite players, Matt. They talked Lamar Jackson and the Ravens on yesterday's episode. We're moving over to the Bengals today, and obviously a fun team. Before we talk Joe Mixon and who we're buying, selling, and holding on this roster, let's name all the names, because we do have brand new ADP as well. As we've been going through this series, I've been quoting May ADP from Dynasty League Football. We now have our June ADP posted, so you can go check that out. Jamar Chase is the wide receiver 2 and the most valuable Cincinnati Bengal. This is the one quarterback ADP, so that's why it's Chase and not Burrow. T. Higgins is next, wide receiver 18. Joe Burrow is the quarterback 4, third most valuable member of the Bengals. Joe Mixon, running back 20, and then a big drop off because we've got Chase Brown, the rookie running back, at RB 45, Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 72, Irv Smith, tight end 23, Charlie Jones, another rookie, is wide receiver 108, and Travion Williams, running back 85. Matt, obviously a lot of big names, a lot of important names on this roster when it comes to dynasty and fantasy football in general. But I do want to start with Joe Mixon. I had Joe Mixon listed as my hold here, and we were kind of chatting before we got started. We both are, I think this is fair to say, both concerned about his future, about him possibly not being a member of this team, which would, in my opinion, hurt his value. We're seeing some of these other veteran running backs just hang out on the market and unfortunately not get a ton of interest. Mixon might be next. That being said, he just doesn't have a ton of trade value right now. So I'm holding on to him and kind of waiting to see how this plays out rather than selling at what is a pretty low market right now. What about you?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I would love to move on from him. I did see a couple of trades in the DLF trade finder where someone got a first for him, and if you can get a first in 2024, I think I'm taking any first. The most recent trade was actually Damian Harris and a first for Joe Mixon and Tim Patrick. But I mean, that kind of value, you're going to get the production from Harris this year, probably in the form mostly of touchdowns. And then you get the first next year. Like, that's the kind of deal I'm looking for. But the second most recent trade is him straight up for Chigozie Okonkwo, who I like quite a bit too, but not for a running back like Joe Mixon, right? So his value is a little bit all over the place. If I could get a first, I'm out, but I just don't think you're going to get a first in most situations.
Feels like we've grouped Mixon and Dalvin Cook together really for much of their career, both members of the class of 2017. And and now kind of dealing with similar situations and being at similar spots in their career. Of course, Dalvin Cook, one of those names I was referencing as a veteran who is hanging out on the market and hoping he gets a job. It's been what now, over a week since he got released. And, we've heard rumors. We talked a lot about Cook as a possible member of the Dolphins, but really no movement on Dalvin Cook. And if Mixon is released, we might be looking at a repeat of that situation. But as you said, he's just not going for much in trades based on the trade finder. I totally agree with you, by the way. If you can get a first rounder, that's an easy call. So it sounds like he's a hold for you as well then.
Yeah, a hold unless I can get a first, or a player equivalent. If I can pivot to a wide receiver in his range, then I'm happy to do that as well. But I just not sure you're going to get it right now. He's one of those players we talk about in Dynasty all the time, where especially at the running back position, where people are afraid to make a move on these guys, earlier in the offseason. And we're approaching the midpoint of the offseason. But, as we get closer, as he starts playing games, if he has one of those big blow up games in the early part of the season, that's probably going to be your best bet to move on. And you just kind of have to hope he doesn't suffer one of those running back injuries that tend to happen in training camp. So I think if you are moving him, if your plan is to move him, it should be closer to the season.
Yeah, I like that kind of clarification as well, because I don't think this is a hold indefinitely. This is kind of a hold until, fingers crossed, the value bounces back, whether that's with Cincinnati kind of reaffirming his position. I think if we get some clarity that he is going to be a Bengal, we'll see the value increase a little bit. If he ultimately gets cut and lands in a good situation, obviously the value would bounce back. Otherwise, as you said, we're waiting until the season begins and hoping for a couple big games. Looking at that new ADP, I said Mixon was RB20. Some of the names below him, I got to say I'm a little surprised.
Me too.
Rashad White, Cam Akers directly below him, Dameon Pierce, obviously younger backs that you would consider over Mixon at this point. Even Aaron Jones, although he's older, I think his kind of his place on his own team is a little safer. I would prefer Aaron Jones. Zach Charbonnet down there at RB25 is really standing out. We see Dalvin Cook at RB26. That's kind of where I envision Mixon being. I'm surprised he's still even a top 20 dynasty running back based on this new ADP.
Yeah, based on these names after him, I mean, again, we know that ADP is different than trade value in a lot of cases, and I think some of these names below him have more steam on the trade market than Mixon do. But if you can make a pivot to any of those guys that you just mentioned, I'd absolutely do that. One name even farther down the list, I wonder if you could make a one-for-one move for someone like Alexander Mattison down at running back 29. I kind of feel like I would rather have Mattison at least for this season, and if you're holding on to Mixon for one season, maybe that's a kind of move that you might want to look at.
Well, we talk about it on here all the time. We have certainly talked about it on the DLF pod as well, that outside of your elite talents at the top of the running back rankings, we're playing a season to season game with these guys. Sometimes even a week to week game. So you take everything we know about Joe Mixon, take the RB1 status, take all that he's done, and exactly what you said. Do you want Joe Mixon for the next 8, 9, 10 months, or do you want Alexander Mattison? I'd rather have Mattison as well. We could go even further. James Cook, Devon Achane, Kendre Miller, going further down that list. So based on the ADP, Joe Mixon way overvalued. Based on the trades that we're seeing, that's why he landed in that hold category for both Matt and I. So this may be a kind of a league specific situation. If you're finding in your league that Joe Mixon still carries some value, some name value, certainly, as Matt said earlier, if you can still get a first rounder, that becomes a very easy decision. Outside of that, you're probably holding on and waiting. We've talked a lot about Joe Mixon to start the Bengals conversation, but the passing game, both the quarterback and those talented receivers are really the stars of this team. We're going to talk about those guys next. I want to tell you about FanDuel. It is baseball season. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. We got a note about this the other day. They have upped that guarantee to their customers, $1,000 no-sweat first bet. What a deal. Up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, go to fanduel.com/lockedon to join today. Don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go to fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Matt, let's talk about the passing game here. And I want to know, it's tough to, when you look at this roster, I named the names earlier, and we all know the names, Burrow and Higgins and Chase, and even a little deeper, Tyler Boyd and maybe Irv Smith. It's tough to find a guy that you really want to sell on this team that you don't want on your roster. So maybe that was a challenge for you. Who did you identify as the player to sell from the Bengals?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You don't want to sell really any of the major pieces of this offense. So I went slanted towards Superflex, which I know still is not necessarily the most popular format, but it is for me. I don't play in any one quarterback leagues in Dynasty anymore in redraft for sure. But So I went to the quarterback. I went to Joe Burrow, and he's at quarterback 4 in our current ADP. And I think that's totally fine. But one of my favorite things to do at the quarterback position when I have one of these elite guys, especially one that I feel might be a little bit overvalued like Joe Burrow, and the reason for that is he doesn't really provide a whole lot on the ground. And if you guys know me at all, you know I just love the rushing quarterbacks. They provide that extra floor, that extra ceiling when the passing game comes along. And Burrow, he's just not really going to give that extra to us. He has to be so much more efficient through the air. He has to throw so many more touchdowns than these other guys that provide a little bit on the ground for us. So to be able to pivot to one of those guys to use that equity that you have at quarterback position to maybe move down the rankings a little bit and pick up a little something extra on the side to either help your roster somewhere else, maybe pick up some extra draft capital, some depth, maybe even another star in some regards is kind of the move I like to make. So I go to the DLF Trade Finder just to find out what the market is happening. And my maybe hot takey current quarterback one is Lamar Jackson. It has been for years, especially excited with the Tom Muckin offense coming in. Mm-hmm. And there's a trade in the Trade Finder right now, Burrow for Lamar Jackson, Chiggy Okonkwo, and a 25-second. It's not a lot more on top, but you're going to add that rushing upside to it. You probably lose a little bit in terms of reliability at the position. The last 2 seasons, Lamar Jackson has only played 11 full games. But in that time, Lamar Jackson has averaged 21.98 points per game in 2022. In 2021, he averaged 22.89 points. In those 2 seasons, Burrow averaged 21.7 last year, 20.5 last year. And then in 2020, you go back to that season, Lamar Jackson played 15 games, averaged 22.8 points per game, Burrow just 17.9. So I think they're going to probably score in the same range most of the time. But when Lamar Jackson hits, when those legs really come into play for him, it shows up on the scoreboard. Last season in weeks 2 and 3, he had 40-point fantasy games in both of those games. He has 3 of those over the last 2 seasons. And that's just a ceiling that Burrow is going to struggle to get to without throwing for 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. He did get to 39 points in one game last season. But on a week-to-week basis, I just feel like someone like Lamar Jackson offers more upside, and you can take that down the row some more. I think he's Lamar Jackson is like quarterback 6 or 7 right now. In ADP, you can go down to like Trevor Lawrence. You could probably even go down to somebody like Justin Fields and pick up again some of that rushing upside. So with Burrow, I just see a situation where you need an extremely efficient, high touchdown kind of season to really hit those elite numbers, and it's just so much easier to do so with some of these other guys that run a little bit. So if I can pivot, if I can pick up something else on the side, I'd like to move on from Burrow to somebody that maybe people value a little bit less, but can provide a little bit more ceiling.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Actually, you look at the top quarterbacks based on that ADP and think about what they offer you as runners. Obviously, that's almost like bonus points in addition to what they're doing throwing the ball. Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback 1, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. There's Burrow at 4, Lamar, Herbert, Lawrence, Fields, Anthony Richardson, Deshaun Watson rounding out the top 10 quarterbacks. So, of course, most of those are going to give you some weekly upside as ball carriers, in addition to what they're doing throwing the ball. And you're right, Burrow is just not. Lamar, I mean, neither one of these guys are at the point where we're worried about this, but Lamar's actually younger than Joe Burrow. I think that might surprise some people, since Lamar's been in the league a little bit longer than Burrow. But I think it's really easy. I actually did not know Lamar was still your quarterback one. As I said earlier, I knew he was one of your favorite players in the league, but there's a lot of reasons to be excited about him this year. Of course, got the and again, if you listen to yesterday's show, Kate and Marcus talked quite a bit about Lamar Jackson, but the contract is finally settled. They've gotten him some new weapons. And I think most importantly is Todd Monken and that new offense that they're bringing. I'm super excited about that. I like the idea, although I didn't list Burrow as my sell, and honestly didn't really even consider him as a sell for some of the reasons you mentioned there at the beginning. But a pivot to Lamar, to Herbert or Lawrence, who are all ranked below him in that ADP. You're right. If you're getting anything else, that could end up just being, icing on the cake there. So I like it's not a sell at any cost.
No.
If you can't find that deal, keeping Joe Burrow on your dynasty team is not a bad thing. But if you can pivot and get that young tight end, get a late first rounder, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and there's even,
if
if you wanted to go, if you want, he just feels like he's in limbo a little bit for me. Like he's below the top guys like Mahomes and Allen, and he's above the guys like Lamar Jackson. And I'm not sure he offers more ceiling than either of those groups. So there's even a trade in there if you wanted to move up to Mahomes. You just got to tack on McLaurin and Irv Smith on top of Burrow to move up to Mahomes if you really wanted to go the other direction. So I just think there's a lot of different things you could do with Burrow in a Superflex format right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I listed one of the members of this passing game as my sell as well, but it's the wide receiver T. Higgins. T. Higgins is our wide receiver 18. That's actually come down quite a bit lately. I'm sorry, he's 18 overall. I did that last week, I think. T. Higgins is wide receiver 11, 18 overall, and this is simply a case of I think he's overvalued. I look at some of the receivers below him. I would prefer them. I don't think he's a wide receiver one. I mean, part of it is obviously Jamar Chase there to serve as the top target on that team. So, I mean, I'm not afraid of having two wide receivers on a top offense. In general, I think that's fine. I just think valuing T. Higgins as a top 12 guy, and maybe we could say the same about Devontae Smith because he's one spot below at wide receiver 12 and kind of the second option on his team. But I just think T. Higgins is overvalued here. You look at the trade finder for him, and there are plenty of examples where he is being traded for, a first rounder and a very solid asset, or I think there's a couple in here for multiple first rounders. Higgins is just a guy I want to pivot off of at this point.
I can get behind that. You also have, I mean, we presume that the Bengals are just going to re-sign them. Maybe if they move on from Mixon, they're going to free up money to do that. So his future seems okay. But his future might even be better if he moved somewhere else and became that true wide receiver. One get out from under Chase. I guess my only hesitation is like one spot above him at wide receiver 10 is Stephon Diggs. I'd probably rather have Higgins unless I'm just like a stone cold lock to be a top 2 or 3 team this season. You go below him, you see guys like Cooper Kupp. Are you going to move him above him maybe for this season? But so it's just tough. You got the young guys, you got Drake London and Jackson Smith-Njigba below him. Do you want those guys over Higgins? Maybe not for this season, but long term, you probably do. So he's just in a weird spot for me. He's certainly in the sell category more than a buy, but maybe closer to a hold for me.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, good suggestion there as far as looking at some of the names below or around him, because they are a bunch of those veterans, the Diggs, Cup, Tyreek Hill, and Adams group. Those four old guys that we often discuss. But DK Metcalf's at wide receiver 14. I'd rather have him.
Yeah.
I would rather have Devontae Smith, even though, as I said, it's a little bit of the same argument. I do want Drake London. I do want JSN, although there's, as you said, some question about what they're going to give you this year. Christian Watson down at wide receiver 20. I think I could make a case for him over T. Higgins as well. So yeah, like I said, I like T. Higgins. Again, if he's on your roster, as we said with Burrow, it's not a must sell. I just think he's overvalued and really has been for the past year or so, in my opinion, as he's creeped up into that late wide receiver 1, early wide receiver 2 category. He used to be kind of the poster boy for pivot off of CD Lamb, pivot off of, Stephon Diggs a couple of years ago, pivot off of those guys to Higgins. And that's not as easy anymore the way we're valuing him. So now he's the guy I want to pivot off of. All right. We have talked about who we're selling. We've talked about who we're holding. We got to buy some players on this team. We're going to do that next. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Everydayers, check out tomorrow's show. Matt Price will be back as our guest host. And we'll be talking about the Cleveland Browns. A lot of interesting players on that roster as well. So check out tomorrow's show. We'll talk Deshaun Watson and the Browns. Matt, we got to finish up the Bengals conversation first, though. As I said, we're selling a couple of very valuable players, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow. We're hanging on to Joe Mixon until we see how his situation shakes out. Who do you want to buy on this team? And, maybe it's easy. Maybe it's just Jamar Chase and paying the iron price for him. But that's a challenge, at least in my leagues. I can't seem to get him on my roster. So maybe digging a little deeper. Who are you buying?
Yeah, this is a team it's really hard to find buys for. Just like it's just such a good team. All of these assets we really like. And like you said, they're going to be expensive. You're either going to overpay. In Chase's case, I think it's worth it. In Higgins' case, I think you could go either way. Burrow, the same in Superflex, maybe a little bit too expensive. So I went dumpster diving, man, and I'm playing out the scenario that they're moving on from Joe Mixon. They really didn't do much to address the running back position. There's still a lot of veterans hanging out there. Maybe they bring in, if they were to move on from Mixon, maybe they bring in Hunt or Fournette or one of these guys. And I'm sure they won't roll with just what they have. But what we have right now is the rookie Chase Brown, who tested out really well athletically. We know he's a kind of an athletic marvel. He didn't really put it all together on the field all the time at college. But he's an exciting prospect. And then I don't know, this is a free guy, Ryan, Travion Williams. We really haven't seen anything from him in the NFL. I think 47 career carries in 4 years. It's part of the 2019 or 2018 class, one of those two. Really haven't seen him on the field. He did get some steam earlier this offseason in the news reports saying that they would be comfortable with him handing the ball, but they just haven't shown him shown the want to with Travion. Last season I did watch. If you want to go look up some highlights for Travion Williams in the NFL, it won't take you too long to watch it. I found a 1 minute clip. He had a really nice full extension catch over his head, so I think he can probably catch the ball and be receiving back. But I just don't think they're going to turn it. Give him the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And neither with Chase Brown. But these guys are basically free. Brown is a late third. In rookie drafts, often case I've even seen him in the 4th round in some cases. I think I got him for $1 in one auction, and then Travion is probably on your waiver wire in shallower leagues. So these are just complete dart throws that you're hoping to fall into some volume with a very good offense.
So if it did play out that way, if they move on from Mixon, they cut him to save some money, do you think they trust these guys, Brown and Travion, enough to roll with them as the Vikings are seemingly doing with Alexander Mattison? Or would they bring in one of these other veterans? Maybe it's Fournette or Zeke or even Dalvin Cook on a lower salary. What would your expectation be there?
I don't think they would necessarily roll into the season with just these two. And, they do have a guy who people were excited about last season, Chris Evans, who did absolutely nothing after we got excited about him especially for best ball leagues. Right. So yeah, I do think they would bring in a veteran, but as a dart throw option, any veteran they would bring in, I would assume that Chase Brown is more athletic than them at this point in their career. So if they want those splash plays, I think it has to be somebody like him.
I definitely agree with you on the Chase Brown call. Looking at rookie ADP, this is actual ADP, meaning it is coming from real MFL rookie drafts, rookie in dynasty leagues held on my fantasy league. And Chase Brown's the RB9 and 25 overall. So in your typical 12-team league, he is going to cost you a late second or an early third rounder. And at that price, I think it is well worth the investment. And even if Mixon does stick around, I think Chase Brown is a guy I want to get on my team and again, kind of see how the situation plays out. The player I list, I went dumpster diving too, Matt. I went with Irv Smith, the tight end. They bring in Irv Smith from Minnesota, really talented player, we think. And I say we think because he just hasn't been able to stay healthy and stay on the field. But we do love the profile, former day two draft pick and in line to be the starter in Cincinnati. I really thought even after they signed him, they would still draft a tight end fairly highly. That didn't happen. And so now it's all systems go for Irv Smith and at the tight end 23 price. I'm willing to make that investment. If you're talking about an established league, he's probably going to cost you. Maybe you can get him for a third rounder. I think the better way to attack that would be make him a throw in on a larger deal. That's what I would prefer to do. But again, it's all just going to come down to his health and staying on the field. Even a guy like Hayden Hurst last year, CJ Uzoma a couple years ago, those guys offered us some solid fantasy production. And I think Irv Smith is just better more talented than those players, again, when he's on the field.
Yeah, he just came into the league so young, and the injuries have been a thing for him. He's still kind of learning the position. It feels weird to say, but at just 24 years old and not a ton of game time. Just, I guess my hesitation. You know what I'm going to say, Ryan. He's never going to be a top two option on that team, right? And it's really difficult to make an impact as a tight end from a fantasy standpoint. If you're not one of those top two options on your team. So from that perspective, I'm not holding out for much, but I like the dart throw. I think, like you said, you nailed it, like with a third round pick and you need some depth at the tight end position. Maybe you're just looking for a spike week, which certainly he could provide. So like it, any tight end in a good offense, even if they're not a top two option or worth rostering at this point. And Irv Smith has been someone who we have loved since coming into the league. So yeah, I like that call.
That is going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow our vacationing buddy, Matt Williamson, at Williamson NFL. Follow our guest host, Matt Price, at Matt Price FF. And I'm Ryan MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.